So friends, broadly in the first part of the discussion, we have covered the introduction of English as a language in India and then expanded on it. Professor Payal Nagpal has taken particular care to bring in the Indian context, the context of the colony, the context of India, the context of the spirit, and the requirements of the language that came from outside, and the interaction between the English language and other languages in India. So, from that theoretical point, we now go further and see the complexity in its true form as it emerged in the following in the years following the introduction of English in India in the 1835 year, and in the technical sense. Otherwise, English had been there as a medium of communication even in the 18th century, and there are references to that. So, all those things have to be kept in mind. So, I'm now curious to know further from Professor Payal Nagpal regarding the issue that is at hand. So, over to you again.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So, as we have already discussed that, moving on from the foreword written by Raja Rao, which combines the Indian emotional makeup, the tempo, the style of storytelling. In short, the entire Indian register is to be infused into the English language, and how he does that in his novel Kantapura. So, to make a jump here to the 1990s, when the Malayalam poet and critic K. Sachidanandan had given us an important term. So, almost countering the objections raised by a lot of the writers in the bhashas that, English really speaking is an alien language. So, whose cultural register and verbal associations are not accessible. So, he says that an important term that we need to keep in mind here is the fact of assimilation. And the process of assimilation is important because I think the project that Raja Rao, the project started earlier, but the way he solidifies it and expresses it and documents it. So this particular project is one of assimilation, and he also counters this by giving a lot of reasons and statistical data about how India is probably, this is from 1990s, and I'm sure this has changed further, is the third largest English using nation, and about 5% more than the percentage of users of some of the other languages. So this process of assimilation is of great value for us to make a point, both at the national and the global level. So to have these conversations both within the country and outside, this process of assimilation becomes very important. And Sachidanandan also cites Shashi Deshpande, who says that in talking about the language per se, it is not really appropriate to pit English writing against the writings in the different regional languages, because the regional languages are rich in their literature, some of them being about 1,000 years old, and English in that sense is barely about, in terms of establishing itself, is about 100 years old. So, so it is these two factors, looking at the objective data and looking at the way in which the process of assimilation starts pretty much actually in the 19th century, when we look at some of the first texts on in each of the genres, we'll come across some very, very interesting observations. So if we look at if we look at poetry as a genre, then in the first poem is written by Louis Vivien de Rosio, to India, My Native Land. This is in 1827. So it's interesting that in terms of written published form, we have poetry that makes the first foray, and this is followed, interestingly, not by fiction but by drama. So one would generally tend to think that maybe it all started with probably the writing of the novel. Well, it did not, because it started with the writing of a poem, and this was followed not by fiction but by drama. And for a long time, the Parsi baronet was considered to be the first play in English, and recently in about 2019 with the book by Anandalal that gave us three very important plays in English, and the first play is The Persecuted by Krishna Mohan Banerjee, written in 1831. So this also interestingly predates, the minute. So the first novel, appears much later, and this is written by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay and is Raj Mohan's wife, and is first serialized in the Indian Field magazine, and this is about 1864. So at the same time, we also have so here, if we look at it in terms of the different genres, we see that the process and the churning had, as Professor Prakash repeatedly pointed out, that technically, of course, the debate begins with the minute, but prior to that particular moment, it's not as if English as a language was not there. It was there, and both poetry and drama are testaments to that fact. So I'd request Professor Prakash to share his views on this. I thought this was an interesting find by Anandalal, that where it's drama actually that really speaking.
The moment you made this point, I started thinking, as to how that drama straight away, entered the scene, and my immediate guess is that drama is quite strong as a tradition, a literary tradition in England. And novel is just a child in the early 19th century. The first novel per se would be written somewhere in the 1830s or so. Who is the writer? Fielding is the writer, and the
18th century.
In the 18th century, and the fiction of that kind is totally different from the fiction that emerged later in the 19th century. But then, when you came to English literature, then either it would be poetry or it would be drama. Because drama is much more strong, and it's a point of debate and a point of discussion. And in fact, drama is a very lively literary form.
Yes.
Novel is or short story is not that kind of lively form that drama is. You have 2 characters, 3 characters, 10 characters standing in front of you on the stage and are presenting their own predicament. So that is what is the beauty of the English language and the English literature. And when the chance was taken by the English language in the Indian context, then drama would naturally be the right choice. So maybe that's the reason. And drama, in fact, in the 19th century would be a bone of contention also, because when you present 2 different points of view, this view and the opposite view presented by the characters, then a kind of liveliness is created, and sometimes it also inconveniences people, because you start thinking about other areas also which drama takes up.
Yes, and also it's quite important to mark the fact in the 3 plays that Anandalal recovers, and one is The Persecuted, which is the first play written in English, and then of course there is another play that he mentions, Michael Madhusudan Dutt's Rizia, and which takes the whole Shakespearean structure, in terms of writing Rizia, and then there's an anonymous writer who's written a play called Kamini. So there is, of course, the genre is kind of already there, it's established, and it's interesting to note the way in which, even in terms of the writing of The Persecuted, the structure is, one can see the grappling with an English structure and, the language, the structure, but the experience, the sensibility, and the cultural context, both of this intermingling, and of course, essentially the experience of being in India. Again, to move further to other firsts here. So, the first novel written in English by a woman is Toru Dutt's Bianca, or the Spanish Maiden, and we know that Toru Dutt lived for just about 21 years, but she was a young, extremely productive writer, and during her lifetime she of course published essays on a French poet, and there are her letters that are available. Then she also contributed poetry on a regular basis to the Bengal magazine and the Calcutta Review, and posthumous publications include Bianca, which is an unfinished novella, and of course the Journal of Mademoiselle the Hours. The Bianca, or the young Spanish maiden, can be dated to about 1878. So we see that pretty much in the 19th century, the women are also kind of making an intervention here. And Bianca is also very interesting because, at one point we also spoke about the intellectual makeup, the emotional makeup, and so on. But here, Toru Dutt, who had also been abroad, had studied there, when she comes back, she also keeps comparing, and a lot of the writing tries to kind of imitate the English experience more than the Indian cultural context. And that is also because she's also making a foray into this kind of writing. So one has to look at Toru Dutt's Bianca in that particular context. So this is also, if we are talking about 1878, it's important to keep in mind that we've already had the mutiny, the revolt of 1857, and India is a colony at that time of the British Empire. So when she discusses Calcutta in her letters and goes on into elaborate descriptions of the Hooghly Bridge, for instance, she compares it with the Suez Canal. So one can see that in Toru Dutt's mind, there is a constant comparison that is going on between, she says, for instance, how the streets in the native quarter of Calcutta are very dirty and narrow and blocked up, and how she says it's a wonder to me how we get through them without any accident at all. Whereas she compares it with her experience of the European part of the town and says that's far better. And at one point she says that she wishes that she were out of Calcutta, and but also that her vision is for a more modern Calcutta. So in this brief life and in this very, very prolific writing, we can see these are not positions in a sense that she's talking about, but these are also cultural interactions and cultural encounters and experiences that Toru Dutt is able to document. So Toru Dutt's writing becomes very important for this reason, because I think a lot of the questions and clashes that Raja Rao talks about much later, we can already see those contradictions in this unfinished novella titled Bianca, because when you read it, the sense that one will get is that one is probably reading an English text and not so much an Indian text, and so which is why the protagonist is the subtitle is a Spanish maiden. So here, if Professor Prakash, you'd like to...
The picture that way is really very complicated, in the sense that, in fact, I was thinking in the meantime about the title Persecuted. So the moment, in the play, there is the theme of persecution, then somehow it gets connected with the persecution of the Indians by the English, or if the characters are there in the play, then that persecution in some form or the other will emerge as that kind of reality, loudly commenting on the Indian scene at that point of time. And then in the novels that you have mentioned, and the Bianca and others, you will find that the writer has to ultimately make the Indian reality enter the scene, the description. And if the Indian reality is there, then Calcutta is there, then there are streets which are the Indian streets are there, and those streets tell a different story than the one that streets in a European city or country would be presented. So literature has this very strange dialectical tendency to present the picture which is many-sided, and that difference of perceptions, difference of the scene that is being captured, that makes all the difference to the language which is used to present such scenes. So I realized that in the 19th century, the best way to understand the 19th century would be to understand the literary representation of the reality of that time. And in the meantime, the language will be twisted, and some new coinages will occur, some old forms will have to be questioned again and again, and that's how language develops. So I believe that reference to poetry, reference to the novel, reference to plays in the 19th century is a very good starting point to understand the evolution of a language which initially is planted, but finally it becomes a kind of plant, and it has its own ways to go further in the process of evolution.
So actually, when we, it's another interesting anecdote about, Toruda's life is that when the census people actually approached, the family, so the father actually did not write authoress against her name, because otherwise he was educated, learned, but did not want this association. So we look at Torudat also as a bold woman who's kind of, she's of course for the novel she's used a setting that is England. Bianca's half Spanish, half English, because somewhere one is compelled to ask that one of the reasons could be that she's a woman who's making a foray into this area, and the question is, can she take up a context that belongs to the Indian woman? So this question is actually answered sometime later, by Krupabai Satyanathan. So if we talk about the first autobiography, that would of course be Rasasundari Devi's Amar Jiban, written in 1876. But the first autobiography that is written in English by an Indian woman is Krupabai Satyanathan's Saguna. And this is subtitled Story of Native Christian Life. This was serialized in the Madras Christian College magazine and in 1887-88, and finally published in 1895. Here again, of course, we are looking at the context of life writing, the context of finally, a woman talking about her own life. So life writings are of course available, but we are also looking at life writing in the English language, and to really see, in this discussion about the 19th century and the way in which English is taken up as a language of expression by the writers, it's almost like doing conducting a test in a laboratory to see what do we really get. So life writing in the English language is very, very experimental, because it's Krupabai's life, and she it's an autobiography. So it's life writing. There is an element of the real here, and she's how comfortable is the final output, how comfortable is the writer in terms of using a language that is not inherently Indian, and we are now talking about the end of the 19th century. So but here we see the evolution of a young woman in India of the 1880s, and so on the one hand there might be the accomplished woman abroad, but we are seeing the Indian woman and what her life is and what the context is. So we've of course I think already had a lecture on this, how Ruqya Shakhawat Hussain Sultana's Dream is the first utopian literature in English by an Indian woman. So there are a lot of firsts, and at this point it would be interesting to also go back to Indian English drama. And when we talked about the beginnings, and I'd saved this towards the end, how the title, The Persecuted, it also has a subtitle which gives us the structure. It's dramatic scenes, so illustrative of the present state of society in Calcutta, and written in, of course, by Krishna Mohan Banerjee, who's talked about his own experience, really speaking, and how he's excommunicated, how he finally converts to Christianity, and he seeks refuge with Alexander Duff. And important point here is, of course, how, in terms of theatre history, it's the first Parsi Baronet of 1866, which was written by C.S. Nazir, is, no longer the first play, really speaking, written in English, but of course is The Persecuted, and is based on Krishna Mohan Banerjee's personal experience, in real life. So that, of course, again brings in an entirely different context. It's a volatile sort of play.
Can I ask you a question in the context that it's very interesting that the way you are explaining the plays, the short stories, the poetry, and the autobiographies or biographies written in the 19th century. But imagine that before English is brought into India in the 19th century, people would not think of writing biographies. And it's a new kind of genre even for the Indian writer, in the sense that maybe there are certain accounts available in the poems, etc. But prose is not being used by Indians. And for the first time, when English is available, and English has a history of prose writing, so right from the 17th century onwards, then people will stick to that tradition and will try to put the Indian content into the language at that time. So I think this is the contribution of English language to the Indian reality, that now people start thinking about their own life, their own evolution, the word that you use, that once the woman was a child and it was a girl, and finally she became a woman, and as a woman she went through all those things. Now this kind of format, this kind of structure is not there in Indian writings at all. It is there only in English. Yes. And when you come from India and write in that kind of mode, then there is a lot to be learned from the English language and literature.
So it's interesting to note that Krupabai Satyanathan follows Saguna with another novel based on the life of a woman, which is Kamla. So,
yes.
So that's another one. Then Lakshmi Bai Tilak, who writes I Follow After. So a lot of women are kind of using the prose form, both in English as a language and of course in the bhashas to kind of which of course today thanks to translation we have access to a lot of documents. And again, even for that matter, Sultana's Dream. So it is the first feminist utopia, so to say. So all these factors, really speaking, tell us how women are not just using English, but are also using the form of prose, as you've pointed out, to talk about either their lives or to write poetry or to come up with, another form of expression.
So even when the Indian languages are available to express yourself in, people have not used those languages in the 18th century or in the early 19th century. But when English comes and you start reading English, first as a language, then as literature, then you say that perhaps the same thing can also be done in the Indian languages.
Yes.
So that way, genres also are transported from one language, one country to another. And this contribution of English to Indian writing cannot be forgotten.
Yes, it's certainly true. And, we make such a if we look at, we move from the 19th to, post-independence Indian English writing. So there's a rapid change and there's a complete transformation almost, post-1950s. And in the previous lecture when we discussed Kamla Das. So it's very, very sharp and very intense writing, when she writes poetry, for instance. So it's also defiant, and she's totally doing away with all the established structures and finding her voice in poetry and in prose, because she's also written my story. So, both these factors tell us about the way in which things change rapidly in the post-independence period, and how a lot of writers, use English as a language that is their own, and writers have, it is in the hands of these writers actually that English has grown as a language, has evolved as a language of expression in the context of India, because it's always, an interactive process, how we partake of the language, and the language also partakes of the cultural sensibility of the country in which it is being used. And this is what makes, the connection between language and culture a very, very dynamic one. So, it's, of course, when she says, Kamla Das says that she did not have a tradition to fall back on. So, she's not talking, really speaking, about the tradition of writing in English. What she means is the way in which English was being used. So I think the post-independence period, was liberating, I think, in a sense for the writers who were able to kind of find their feet in a language that was not very old. So
How would you like to sum it up, the discussion, starting from the 19th century, then going through different phases? You refer to the, reform movements, you refer to the national movement, and language was an important factor in all these movements and, changes that occurred at the social level. So, what finally would you say on this?
I think any discussion on Indian English writing, the very term itself tells us that it is Indian English, that this is a dynamic process, the relationship between language, country, culture is a dynamic one, and there is a constant intermingling, there is a constant give and take that takes place, which only makes culture richer and the language more evolved. So today I think English carries a lot of words from the Indian context, and so I think that itself is testimony to the fact that in India, English has grown and evolved as a language. And of course, it's a language of usage, of expression, but a language also in which today I think we can say that our emotional makeup can be reflected in the language.
So would you say that there is something called Indian English? Would you finally say it today?
Yes, I would like to say that there is something called Indian English.
And there is a kind of social, change that is occurring. There are public schools, there are other institutions, English is available, knowledge is available through English, not just in the area of literature, but also in sciences and other things. So it has become finally Indianized, the English language.
Absolutely, because when we talk about a world in which globalization has taken place and all encounters today are global, they are at the international level. So it's important for us to also, use Indian English, because Indian English then also becomes interventionist. I mean, we are no longer using the colonizers' language per se. We are using a language that we have made our own. So it belongs to us.
In fact, we used the English language in India even against the interests of the colonizers.
Yes. So
right in the national movement.
Yes, like the national movement.
Oh, yes, that's true.
Certainly.
So friends, we come to the end of the discussion, and there are lots of points. We are not offering any conclusion. We are not offering any resolutions of all the issues that have been raised by Professor Payal Nagpal. She has said that it's still evolving. It has evolved from one point to another, and it goes on prospering further in our new context. And that's how literature should be discussed. So please go over all these issues in your own case. You are a scholar yourself, and all these issues would be confronted by you as well. So all of us have this kind of an endeavor to go through and to make things available in Indian and in English language. And in fact, English language also has become very, very clearly Indianized. So with this conclusion, we come to the end of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you
for such a scintillating presentation, and difficult one, also very challenging. So that's where we end. Thanks.